The space station was quiet that night. Most people were asleep, and only the soft hum of the engines filled the air. Ethan Cole sat in his small apartment at the far end of the outer ring, drinking a cup of coffee and reading an old data pad. He liked this part of the station because it was peaceful, away from the crowded market decks and noisy bars. Then, a sound broke the silence. A knock. It was light at first, almost like someone tapping their fingers against the door. Ethan froze. He wasn't expecting anyone. And visitors were rare here. He placed his cup down and walked slowly to the door. For a moment, he thought he might be imagining it. But then, the knock came again. This time, louder, quicker, like the person on the other side was in a hurry. Ethan pressed the panel to check the small camera feed. The image flickered, and his eyes widened. A woman stood outside, but not a human woman. Her skin was pale silver, with faint blue patterns glowing under it. Her large eyes reflected the corridor lights, and her hair fell in soft white strands across her shoulders. She was clearly Solari, a race Ethan had only seen from a distance. In the station's trade district, they were known for keeping to themselves and avoiding human contact. She looked nervous, glancing over her shoulder again and again. Her clothes were torn, her breathing fast, when she saw the camera light turn red. She stepped closer. Her lips trembled before she whispered something. The audio crackled, but Ethan heard the words, "I can cook, I can clean, but can be quiet." Ethan's brow furrowed. It was such a strange thing to say. Why would an alien woman show up at his door offering that? Before he could think more, she looked behind her once more, and her expression turned to pure fear. Ethan hesitated. Letting her in could mean trouble if someone was chasing her. He didn't want to get caught in the middle, but there was something in her voice, a quiet desperation that made it hard to turn her away. With a sigh, he unlocked the door. The panel slid open, and she stepped inside quickly as soon as the door closed. She pressed her back against it, breathing heavily like she had run a long way. Ethan studied her for a moment. Up close, she looked even more fragile, thin, trembling. Her hands clutched together as if she was afraid he might push her out. "What's going on?" he asked in a careful voice. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she lowered her eyes and said softly, "Please. I just need a place to stay for tonight. I will work. I will not disturb you." Ethan scratched the back of his neck. "I'm not running a hotel," he said, but his tone wasn't harsh. Something about her made him feel uneasy in a protective way. It wasn't just that she looked scared, it was the way she kept listening. For sounds outside, her gaze moved around his small apartment, the single couch, the little kitchen, the workbench in the corner where he repaired old ship parts. Then her eyes came back to his. "I can pay," she said quickly. But when she opened her small bag, there was nothing inside except a small piece of folded cloth and a broken piece of metal. Ethan sighed again. "You're not from here," he said. She shook her head. "I escaped," she whispered, her voice trembling from the way she said it. Ethan knew there was more to the story, but she clearly didn't want to talk about it now. Suddenly, faint footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Her head snapped toward the door, her body stiff. Ethan moved to the side and peered through the small viewer. Two tall figures in black armor were walking past, their helmets hiding their faces. They stopped near his door and looked around. The woman's hand gripped the side of the table tightly, her knuckles turning pale. Ethan's heart beat faster. He didn't know who these men were, but he could guess they were searching for her. The armored men finally walked away, and the sound of their boots faded. The woman slowly released her breath. Ethan looked at her again. She was clearly in some kind of danger. And now that she had stepped into his home, he was part of it whether he liked it or not. He walked to the small kitchen and poured her a cup of water. She took it with both hands and sipped carefully. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice so quiet it was almost lost in the hum of the station. Ethan leaned against the counter. He didn't know her name. He didn't know what kind of trouble she was in, and he didn't know why she had chosen his door of all doors. But one thing was certain. Whatever this was, it was only the beginning. Ethan placed the empty cup on the counter and tried to think. The Solari woman sat quietly at the edge of the couch, her posture stiff, her eyes fixed on the floor. She didn't touch anything, didn't look around much, as if afraid he might order her out if she moved too much. "What's your name?" he finally asked. She hesitated before answering. "Lyra," she said softly, almost like she wasn't sure if she should tell him. "All right, Lyra," Ethan replied. "Why were those guys outside looking for you?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled the torn sleeve of her dress lower, as if to hide her arm. But Ethan caught a glimpse of dark bruises, shaped like a grip. Someone had grabbed her hard. She saw his eyes notice, and quickly turned away. "I don't want trouble," Ethan said. "If someone dangerous is after you, I need to know." Lyra's lips trembled, but she only said, "I won't cause trouble for you. I promise. I just need a place to stay tonight." Ethan rubbed his temple. He had lived alone for years, and he liked it that way. But now, there was a frightened alien woman in his home, and his instincts told him sending her back outside would be the same as sending her into the hands of whoever had hurt her. "Fine," he muttered. "You can stay." For tonight, a small flash of relief crossed her face. She stood and walked toward the kitchen, glancing at the shelves. "I will cook for you," she said, her voice firmer now. "It is only fair." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You don't have to," but she was already searching the cupboards. Her movements were quick and practiced. It was obvious she had done this many times before. She found a pack of dried noodles, some vegetables, and a small jar of spice. Without asking more, she began preparing a meal. Ethan watched in silence. There was something graceful about the way she worked, her hands moving with precision. The scent of cooking soon filled the room, richer, deeper than anything he could have made himself. When she placed the steaming bowl in front of him, he hesitated, then took a bite. It was good, far better than anything he had eaten in weeks. "This is really good," he admitted. A faint smile touched her lips, but it faded quickly. Cooking, cleaning. So words she had whispered at his door echoed in his mind. Why would someone from a proud alien race like the Solari offer such things to a stranger? After dinner, Lyra began cleaning the small kitchen without being asked. She moved silently, not making a sound as she washed the dishes. Ethan almost forgot she was there until he saw her pause. Staring at the sink's metal surface, he noticed her hands trembling again. "What is it?" he asked. She shook her head quickly. Nothing, but her eyes betrayed her. It wasn't nothing. Something had left her constantly on edge. Later, Ethan set up a spare blanket and pillow on the couch. "You can sleep here," he said. She nodded, but didn't lie down right away. Instead, she stood by the window, staring out at the distant stars. "You live far from the main decks," she said quietly. "Yeah," Ethan replied. "I like the quiet." She gave a small nod. "Quiet is good. Safe." Before he could ask what she meant, there was a faint sound in the corridor again. Ethan stiffened, moving to the door. He didn't open it. Listened to low voices, speaking in a language he didn't understand. He looked at Lyra, who was already backing away from the door, fear in her eyes. "Who is it?" he asked. "They are looking for me," she whispered, her voice shaking. Ethan's mind raced. He had only met her an hour ago, but he was already part of this. If the wrong people found her here, he could lose his home, maybe even his freedom. Still, something in her expression, that mixture of fear and hope, made it impossible to tell her to leave. The voices outside faded, and for the first time that night, Lyra allowed herself to sit down. Ethan sat across from her. "You're going to have to tell me the truth sooner or later," he said, her eyes lowered again. "Tomorrow, she said. "I will tell you tomorrow." Ethan sighed, leaning back. He didn't like mysteries, but for now, she was safe here, at least until morning. Still, couldn't shake the feeling that whatever her story was, it was going to change everything. The morning came slowly on the station. There was no sunrise here, only the dim shift of lights from night mode to day mode. Ethan woke up to the faint smell of something cooking. He sat up and saw Lyra in the kitchen again, moving quietly as she prepared breakfast. For a moment, it felt almost normal, like she had always been there. "You didn't have to do that," Ethan said, rubbing his eyes. She gave him a small glance and said, "I told you, I will work for my place here." Her voice was calm, but he could tell it was just a thin cover. Over something deeper, last night's fear was still in her eyes. When they sat down to eat, Ethan decided it was time. "All right, Lyra. You said you'd tell me today," he began, "so tell me." She didn't speak right away. Instead, she stirred her food slowly, as if looking for the right words. "I am from the Solari homeworld," she said finally. "My people. We have old laws, old ways. Women like me can be claimed by a powerful man if our families agree. It is seen as an honor. But for me, it was a prison." Her voice grew softer. "My family owed debts. Large debts. They sold me to a merchant named Varek. He is rich, well-connected, and cruel. I became his property. I cooked for him, cleaned for him, stayed silent when he ordered it. For years, if I spoke too much, there was punishment." Ethan's jaw tightened. "That's not just cruel. That's slavery," he said. Lyra's lips curved into a sad smile. "In my world, it is not called slavery. But it feels the same." She looked down at her hands. "The collar I wear. It is not just decoration. It marks me as claimed. It has a tracker, so I cannot run far. And it can hurt me if I disobey," she admitted, her voice shaking slightly. Ethan felt a spark of anger in his chest. He had heard about Solari traditions, but he hadn't known it was this bad. "So how did you get here?" he asked. Her eyes flickered with something, a mix of pride and fear. 2 nights ago, Varek's ship came to this station for trade. He left me in the ship's quarters while he met other merchants. I waited until the guards changed shifts. Then, I ran. I hid in the cargo levels until I found this corridor. And you picked my door," Ethan said. Leaning back, "I saw no lights, no noise. It was far from the main decks, I thought. Maybe you would not send me back," she said quietly. Ethan stared at her for a long moment. "You're right. I'm not going to send you back," he said firmly. Relief softened her face, but only for a moment, before her eyes grew tense again. "They will look for me," she said. "Varek will not let his property go easily. He will send men. Maybe even speak to station security. He has power. And power here can make rules change." Ethan nodded slowly. "Then we have to make sure they don't find you." But even as he said it, he knew it wouldn't be simple. The station wasn't. Huge word traveled fast, and humans were still a minority here. If Varek offered a reward, it wouldn't take long before someone pointed her out. Lyra glanced toward the door like she could already hear footsteps. "The men you saw last night. They are his hunters," she said. "They will search every level until they find me." Ethan's mind was working now. If she stayed hidden here, it was only a matter of time before someone noticed her. If she moved around the station, she risked being caught in the open. She seemed to read his thoughts. "I can help you," she said suddenly. "I am not just good at cooking and cleaning. Varek made me work in his engine room sometimes. I know how to repair small ships. If you give me a chance, I can be useful to you." Ethan almost smiled. There was determination in her eyes now. She wasn't just a frightened runaway. She was trying to take control of her fate. Before he could reply, there was a sudden thud on the door. Not a polite knock this time, but a heavy hit. Both of them froze. A voice called from the other side. deep and sharp, speaking in Solari. Ethan didn't know the words, but he didn't need a translator. The tone was full of command. Lyra's face went pale. "It's them," she whispered. Ethan looked at her. Then at the door. If he opened it, they might force their way in. If he stayed silent, they might break it down. The knock came again, harder this time, followed by a long moment of silence. Then the sound of footsteps moving away. Ethan let out a slow breath. But Lyra's hands were still shaking. "They know you are here," she said, her voice low. Ethan met her gaze. "Then we have to move fast," he said, because now he knew. Hiding her wouldn't be enough. If Varric's men were at his door, it meant they were already closing in. And if they wanted to take her by force, he would have to be ready. Ethan kept the door locked long after the footsteps faded. He stood there listening, waiting to hear if the hunters were still nearby. Lyra sat on the couch, her knees pulled close, her hands gripping the fabric like she was holding on for safety. "They'll come back," she whispered. Ethan glanced at her. "Yeah, I know." The quiet hum of the station felt heavier than usual. Every sound outside, a distant voice, a clang of metal, made Ethan tense. He wasn't used to being hunted, but now he understood the pressure she had been living under for years. He walked to the small storage cabinet in the corner and pulled out a stun baton. It wasn't much, but it was something. Lyra's eyes followed the weapon. "You plan to fight them?" she asked, her voice full of worry. "I plan to make sure they don't take you," he replied simply. The rest of the day passed slowly. Ethan worked on repairing a broken CUM device at his workbench, but his mind was elsewhere. Lyra moved quietly around the apartment, cleaning, cooking, but also checking the door more than once. Neither of them said much. But the silence wasn't comfortable. It was full of waiting. It was late in the station's evening cycle when it happened. A loud bang shook the door. Ethan jumped to his feet, the stun baton already in his hand. Lyra froze, her eyes wide. The banging came again, followed by a deep voice speaking in Solari. She understood every word and whispered to Ethan. "They say to open the door, or they will force it." Ethan's grip tightened on the baton. "Go to the back," he told her. "Hide." She hesitated for a second before slipping into the small sleeping area. Shutting the door behind her, the banging grew harder. Metal groaned under the pressure. Ethan stood to the side, ready in case they broke through. Then the panel flashed red. Someone was trying to override the lock. Akeha had maybe 10 seconds. Last warning. The voice outside shouted in broken human speech. Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed the small emergency flashbang from his workbench and held it ready. The lock gave a sharp click. The door slid open, and 2 tall Solari hunters stepped. Inside, they wore dark armor and carried stun rifles, their helmets reflecting the dim light. One of them scanned the room with a glowing device. The other looked straight at Ethan. "Human," he said coldly. "Where is she?" Ethan kept his voice calm. "I don't know who you're talking about." The hunter took a step closer. "Do not lie. Varric claims her. She is his property." "She's not property," Ethan said sharply. The hunter tilted his head slightly. "That is not for you to decide." The scanner beeped, and the second hunter turned toward the back room. Ethan knew they had found her before they could move. He tossed the flashbang toward them. A blinding light and sharp crack filled the room. The hunters stumbled, their vision blurred. Ethan swung the stun baton, hitting the nearest one in the side. The armor softened the blow, but the electric shock made the hunters stagger back. "Run!" Ethan shouted toward the sleeping area. Lyra burst out, her eyes wide. She darted past the hunters and grabbed Ethan's arm. They bolted out into the corridor, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind them. The station's outer ring was quiet at this hour. They ran down the narrow walkway, passing closed doors and darkened shop fronts. Ethan could hear the hunters recovering, shouting in Solari as they followed. "Where?" Lyra panted as they ran. "Docking bay," Ethan replied. "If we can reach it. We can hide in the cargo levels." They turned a corner and nearly collided with another figure. Station security, a human officer in blue armor. "What's going on here?" the officer demanded. Before Ethan could speak, the hunters rounded the corner. "This human hides stolen property," one of them shouted, pointing at Lyra. The officer's eyes narrowed. Ethan quickly stepped forward. "She's not stolen. She's a free person. They're trying to take her against her will." The officer frowned, glancing between them. "This is an interspecies matter," he said. "I can't decide this here." Lyra's grip on Ethan's arm tightened. She leaned close and whispered, "If he calls Varric, we're finished." Ethan knew she was right, without proof. Station law would side with the more powerful party, and Varric had influence. They needed to disappear before this became an official case. A sudden noise from deeper in the station distracted the officer, a cargo alarm blaring. Ethan didn't waste the chance. "Come on," he hissed, pulling Lyra past him. They ran again, slipping into a maintenance tunnel before the officer could stop them. The tunnel was dark and narrow, filled with pipes and the steady hiss of steam. Lyra followed close, her breathing quick. "They will not stop," she whispered. "I know," Ethan said. "That's why we're going to have to get off this station." For the first time since meeting him, she didn't look just frightened. She looked ready. Her eyes met his, and she gave a small nod. "Then we run together," she said. Ethan felt a strange certainty in that moment. Whatever trouble this was, he wasn't about to let her face it alone. The maintenance tunnel led Ethan and Lyra to a dim service room filled with crates and old machinery. They stopped there to catch their breath. Lyra leaned against the wall, her chest rising and falling fast. Ethan checked the door behind them twice, making sure it was locked. "They'll search every corridor," he said quietly. "They know you're here now, and they won't stop until they find you." Lyra nodded, still breathing hard. "Then we have to go somewhere they can't follow," she said. Ethan crouched beside an old terminal in the corner. Its screen flickered as he tapped through maintenance logs. "I know a way," he said. "The docking bays? I've a small transport ship there. It's not fancy, but it's fast enough to get us away from the station." Lyra's eyes lit up with hope. "Will it work?" "It will. If we can get past security and Varric's hunters," Ethan replied. "That's a big if." They both knew the docking bays would be heavily watched now. Still, there was no other choice. Ethan grabbed a small toolkit and a folded station map from one of the crates. "First, we'll take the old cargo lifts. Most people don't use them anymore, but they connect to the lower docks," he explained. "From there, we can slip into my bay without crossing the main gates." Lyra stepped closer, her voice low. "I can help. I know how to override certain dock locks. I used to do repairs for Varric's trade ships." Ethan looked at her, impressed. "Good. Then we'll make this work." They set off through the tunnels again. Moving quietly, the air smelled faintly of oil and metal. Every distant sound made them freeze and listen. Twice, they had to duck into side passages to avoid patrols for security. Then to celery hunters, scanning the halls with devices. When they finally reached the old cargo lifts, the doors were covered in dust. Ethan forced them open with a crowbar from his kit. Inside, the lift creaked and rattled as it descended. Lyra kept glancing at the small gap in the door, her nerves showing. "You've done this kind of thing before?" Ethan asked, escaping. She said softly, "No. Running away never worked, but I've been in enough tight spaces to know danger when I feel it." The lift stopped with a heavy thud. They stepped into a narrow hallway that smelled of stale air. Ethan led the way toward Bay 12, his private dock. They were halfway there when voices echoed ahead. Ethan pulled Lyra into the shadows between two large containers. Two station security officers walked past, talking in low voices. Orders double the guard at the human's dock. Ethan's jaw tightened. They were already guarding his ship. Lyra's brow furrowed. What now? She whispered. Ethan thought quickly. We can't go straight in. But there's a maintenance hatch above the dock. If we climb through, we can drop down right onto my ship. They made their way to the hatch, which was half hidden behind stacked crates. Ethan boosted Lyra up first, then followed. Inside, the crawl space was cramped and hot. They moved on hands and knees, careful not to make noise. Through a small grated opening, they could see the dock below. 3 armed Solari hunters stood near Ethan's ship. Talking to 2 human security officers, Varric himself wasn't there. But his presence was felt in the way his men guarded the area. Lyra touched Ethan's arm. If we go down now, they'll catch us, she whispered. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Then we need a distraction. They waited until a small cargo loader rolled into the dock. Its driver parked near a pile of fuel canisters. Ethan pulled a small device from his kit, a pulse jammer. Once this goes off, their scanners and comms will be dead for a few seconds. He explained. He set the timer for 10 seconds and slid the device through the grate. It landed silently behind a stack of crates. A faint beep. Then a sudden crackle of static filled the air. The hunters shouted in surprise, looking at their dead scanners. The security officers stepped back, confused. Now? Ethan hissed. He and Lyra dropped from the hatch onto the upper hull of his ship. The sound made one hunter look up, but Ethan was already pulling Lyra toward the side hatch. She slid inside and ran to the cockpit while he sealed the door. Start the engines, Ethan called. Lyra's hands flew across the controls with practiced skill. The ship hummed to life, the thrusters glowing. The hunters shouted and aimed their rifles. A burst of shots hit the hull, making the ship shudder. Ethan strapped in beside Lyra. Punch it, he said. The ship lifted from the dock just as security tried to lock the bay doors. Lyra pushed the thrusters hard, and the small transport shot forward, squeezing through the narrowing gap behind them. The dock's alarm blared as the station began to shrink in the viewport. Lyra let out a shaky breath. We're out, she whispered. Ethan glanced at her. For now, he said, because he knew Varric wasn't going to give up that easily. The chase had only just begun. The small transport ship sped away from the station. Stars streaked past as the thrusters roared. Ethan kept checking the radar, watching for any sign of pursuit. Lyra sat beside him in the co-pilot's seat, her hands still gripping the controls tightly. For a few minutes, the only sound was the hum of the engines. Then a sharp beep echoed from the radar. Ethan's eyes narrowed. They're following, he said. Lyra leaned forward, her face pale. Varric, she whispered. Sure enough, a large Solari vessel was closing in fast. Its sleek black hull reflected the faint light of distant stars. Ethan had seen merchant ships before, but this one was heavily armed. He's not just chasing us. He's hunting us, Ethan muttered. The Solari ship sent out a come signal. A deep, smooth voice filled the cockpit. Human, return my property now, and I will let you live. Lyra's eyes filled with anger. I am not property, she shouted. Ethan cut the come and pushed the engines harder. But Lyra's hands were trembling. It's not just the ship, she said quietly. The caller. He can track me anywhere. Even if we hide, he will find us. Ethan looked at the metal band around her neck, smooth silver, with faint glowing lines running through it. He had noticed it before, but hadn't thought much about it until now. Can we take it off? He asked. She shook her head. It has a lock that can only be opened by his control code. And if someone tries to force it, it will shock me until I pass out. Ethan frowned. Then we'll have to be smarter, he said. He turned the ship toward a patch of dark space far from the main routes, if they could hide for a few minutes. Maybe they could figure something out. They slipped into the shadow of a drifting asteroid field. Ethan powered down the main thrusters. Letting the ship drift to avoid detection, the celery vessel slowed, scanning the area, but for now. It didn't spot them in the quiet. Ethan moved to the workbench in the back of the cockpit. He pulled out a set of fine tools and a small energy cutter. "Come here," he said to Lyra. She hesitated. "If you try to cut it, I'm not going to just cut it," Ethan said. "I'm going to open it without triggering the failsafe." She sat down, her eyes watching his hands. Ethan examined the collar carefully. There was a faint seam near the back, almost invisible, but enough for his tools. "This is old Solari tech," he murmured. "I've seen something like it on cargo locks. If I can bypass the control node, it won't send a shock." He worked slowly, every movement precise. One wrong touch and the collar could activate. Lyra sat perfectly still. But he could feel her tension minutes past. And sweat began to bead on Ethan's forehead. Finally, he found the tiny energy crystal that powered the failsafe. Using the cutter at its lowest setting, he slid it out. The collar gave a faint click. Lyra's eyes widened. "Did you?" With one final twist of his tool, the collar popped open and fell into his hand. Lyra gasped softly, her hands rising to her bare neck. For a moment, she just sat there, touching her skin like she couldn't believe it. Then she smiled. Not the small, guarded smile she had given before, but a real, warm smile. "I'm free," she whispered. Ethan handed her the collar. "Keep it," he said. "A reminder that no one owns you anymore." The moment didn't last long. The radar beeped again. The celery ship was moving toward the asteroid field. "They're coming." "Back," Ethan said, moving to the controls. Lyra's face hardened. "Then we don't run anymore," she said. Ethan glanced at her. "What are you thinking?" She pointed at the collar. "They want me because of this. So we give them something to chase that isn't me." Her plan was risky. They would attach the collar to a decoy pod and launch it in the opposite direction. The celery ship would detect the tracker and follow it, thinking Lyra was inside. It might not work for long, but it could buy them time. Ethan armed the pod. Lyra programmed the collar to keep sending its signal for another hour. When everything was ready, they launched it toward a distant star lane on the radar. The Solari vessel turned sharply and accelerated after it. "They're taking the bait," Ethan said with a grin. They powered up the engines and set course for deep space. The stars stretched out before them. Lyra leaned back in her seat, the weight of the collar gone for the first time since Ethan had met her. Her shoulders relaxed. "You didn't have to help me," she said quietly. Ethan glanced at her. "Yeah, I did," he replied, "because no one deserves to live in chains." She smiled again. "Then I'll make sure I'm worth the trouble," she said, her voice soft but strong. Ethan had no doubt she would. The decoy pod carrying Lyra's old collar drifted into the star lane, far behind. Varric's ship chased it at full speed, unaware that its prize was gone. Ethan and Lyra's small transport moved in the opposite direction, slipping into the safety of deep space. For the first time in days, the radar screen was empty. No blips, no warnings, just open sky. Ethan leaned back in his seat and let out a long breath. "That's it. We're clear," he said. Lyra looked at him, almost not believing it. "Clear," she repeated softly, tasting the word like it was new. They didn't speak for a while. The hum of the ship and the faint sparkle of distant stars were the only sounds and sights around them. It felt strange, almost unreal, after so much running. Silence felt heavier than danger. Ethan stood and walked to the small kitchen corner. Pouring water into 2 metal cups, he handed one to Lyra, who held it with both hands. "What will you do now?" he asked. She hesitated, her gaze on the dark horizon outside the viewport. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've never been free to choose before." Ethan nodded slowly. "Well, "There's no rush," he said. "You've got time now." Her lips curved into a faint smile. Time. Yes, that's new too. Later, while Ethan checked the ship's navigation, Lyra explored the small living quarters. She touched the walls, the shelves, the tools, not like someone inspecting a place, but like someone trying to remember every detail. When she found the spare bunk, she sat on it for a long time. Her fingers traced the blanket as if it were something precious. It had been years since she had a bed that wasn't under someone's control. When she came back to the cockpit, Ethan was adjusting their course. "Where are we going?" she asked. "There's a free port out on the edge of the trade routes," he said. "No major laws, no Solari influence. A good place to disappear for a while." Lyra studied him for a moment. "You don't have to keep me with you," she said softly. Ethan looked at her and shrugged. "I know. But I'm not the kind of man who drops someone in the middle of nowhere and flies off. Besides, you've got skills. I could use a co-pilot who can fix engines and cook better than me." She tilted her head, almost shyly. Then, "I'll stay," she said. It wasn't just agreement, it was a choice. Her first real choice in a long time. Over the next few days, they settled into an easy rhythm. Ethan handled navigation and ship repairs. Lyra handled meals and made small improvements to the ship's systems. She replaced a faulty coolant line without being asked, upgraded the filtration unit, and even fixed Ethan's old cum device every day. She seemed to stand a little straighter, speak a little louder. One evening, as they drifted past a wide starfield, Lyra leaned against the viewport. "When I first came to your door, I was ready to beg for anything just to be safe," she said quietly. "I thought I would spend the rest of my life being quiet, invisible. But now I don't want to be quiet anymore." Ethan smiled slightly. "Good," he said. "Quiet doesn't suit you." But even in this calm, Ethan stayed alert. Varric was far away now. But men like him didn't forgive or forget. The Solari merchant would realize the trick eventually, and when he did, he might come looking still. Ethan wasn't worried. He knew that whatever came next, they would face it together when they finally reached the free port. It was nothing like the polished stations near the core worlds. This one was rough, old metal walls patched with mismatched plates, corridors crowded with traders, mechanics, and travelers of every species. But it was alive, and more importantly, it was free. They docked quietly, blending in with the other small ships. Ethan arranged for fuel and supplies while Lyra traded some old tools she had carried from Varric's ship for fresh food and clothing. When she returned, she wore a simple jacket that actually fit her. She looked different, lighter somehow, like someone who was finally allowed to exist as they prepared to leave the free port. Lyra looked at Ethan and said, "You've given me my life back." Ethan shook his head. "No, you took it back. I just opened the door." She smiled at that. And when she sat in the co-pilot seat again, it felt like she belonged there. The engines hummed as they lifted from the dock and turned toward the endless stretch of stars. Ethan glanced at her. "So, co-pilot, where to next?" Lyra's eyes sparkled as she looked out into the unknown. "Anywhere," she said, "as long as it's not behind us." The ship slipped into hyperspace, leaving the free port and their old lives far behind for the first time in years. The future wasn't something to fear, it was something to chase. And somewhere in the depths of space, Varric's rage burned, but he was chasing a ghost. By the time he realized the truth, Ethan and Lyra would be long gone, living, choosing, and writing a story that was finally their own.